it could very well be that that account of virtue is 100% true. And it could be that none of us ever lives up to it more than 20 or 30% by the grace of God. And you could say, well, 20 or not even 50, not even 80, let's just abandon it. And it's like, well, look, the difference between living up to it 20% or 30 matters. The difference between living up to it 5 or 0 matters. If you think there are no standards,
Right.
and this is something which is also clear in Catholic social doctrine, then things become untethered. There's a world of difference between wrestling with the question of whether to compromise or not, thinking through whether you are too in love with power or not, or thinking that there is no other pole in relationship to
that. Welcome to Christendom Conversations. Together we'll explore the wisdom of the Catholic intellectual tradition, engage with thought-provoking ideas, and uncover deep insights into the perennial questions. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let's dive into today's conversation. It's a great pleasure to have Dr. Matthew Post here today. He's the program director for our Center for Public Policy and our Master's in Public Policy. So thanks for joining us.
Oh yeah, thank you. It's a great pleasure. And my first time here, and such an incredibly beautiful campus, so peaceful out here. And I don't know, coming to this campus, I feel the call to holiness. I mean, you've done such amazing things here.
That's good news. That's good news. So could you say a bit about your intellectual journey?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Thanks for asking. So I'm a convert to the church, and in my early intellectual formation, which was with Straussians, actually with the student of Alan Bloom's, I might say that I was agnostic, but as we know, one lives effectively like an atheist. And one of the things that was very decisive is at a certain moment, I was told, and I was very grateful for this, that I could have, so to speak, a free ride to Notre Dame in the Ph.D. program there. And my dissertation, which was on Plato and St. Augustine, but reading St. Augustine like a philosopher, I realized at the 11th hour that I should really double check some things. I was relying on Leo Strauss and Hannah Arendt, and if I'm going to have a master's degree, I shouldn't just take their word for it. I should double check what they're saying about Plato and St. Augustine. And I won't say who it was, but when I looked into the footnotes, what they were claiming just wasn't there.
Wow.
Even the words that they were talking about weren't there.
Wow.
And I went into a panic. I'm like, well, it's just a typo. Maybe the chapter or book number wasn't, I'll look in the original. I think after 48 hours, maybe more, I realized, no.
Wow.
And the whole thing is just, it's wrong. I hung my hat on this, and I was wrong. And I went to someone and spoke to them about this. And they said, well, look, it's lovely that you care about the truth in this way.
Sure.
But you have a great path. Yeah. You have a great path ahead of you here. And you can worry about truth once you get to this other institution.
Wow.
And for better or worse, I put my foot down and decided, no, I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken to people about it in years since in academia and received some different responses. The overwhelming response is, you idiot. But, you could have gone to this extremely great Catholic institution. You took a different path. You probably burned bridges, which is true. I did. But I didn't really understand that fully at the time.
Sure.
And occasionally I meet someone who says, good for you.
Yeah. Well, I'll say it again.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. So I rewrote the whole thing. And with the bridges burned, I went to Japan for a little while and still had the help of my Straussian mentor, and eventually ended up at the University of Dallas. And again, there was a really big moment. Again, I'm essentially an atheist, and someone would say, well, being at that Catholic institution, didn't you feel the power of just joining the church? And I hate to say no, but I didn't at that time, right? That doesn't mean the Holy Spirit isn't working and grace isn't working through you, but I didn't see it. But I did have a professor who was making the claim that St. Thomas Aquinas was essentially an atheist. and he had a particular way of reading it. And even though technically, from a religious standpoint, I didn't have a horse in this race, I just didn't think it was a good way of reading them.
Right.
I didn't think it was rigorous. And I challenged this professor, and he got pretty upset at me about it at a certain point.
Hmm.
And he also got upset at me because I was a moral realist. And he just thought, that's like believing in Santa Claus, you
Right.
know? And things came to a head,
Hmm.
and I lost my funding, my
Wow.
teaching position, and my position in the university, all in
Oh.
about the span of a week. And one of my friends said to me, "You're being paranoid." And then when I explained to him the exact order of events, he was like, "Oh no." He's like, you're about to be exiled, you know?
So, wow.
um, and that was the consequence of that. And
Wow.
I couldn't support myself. I was taken in by Dr. Jer Wegemer, who
Oh
oversees the
yeah.
Center for Thomas
Yeah.
More Studies. And I remember he sat me down and he said, "How much money do you need to live?" And I said, "Well, what's the work I can do for you?" And he said, "You misunderstand my question." You know?
Sure.
And I ended up going to Slovakia for a while, coming back eventually to work at UD,
Hmm.
and had a moment, a religious experience that led to my conversion.
Wow.
And one of the things I would say briefly, about why I gave this account in answer to your question is that whether one would say it was prudent or foolish, there was something very important to me about pursuing the truth in all of these moments. Um, and frankly, one of the reasons, and I don't mean this to be dismissive of the academic life, but I don't actually think it's particularly honorable in the eyes of the world. If you want honor in the eyes of the world, go become a tech billionaire, become a doctor, become an engineer. If you're going to do this job, being a professor, I think the only reason to do it is because you care this deeply about the truth. And
Right.
to sacrifice that, what's the point anymore?
Right.
So I stuck to my guns on those things and definitely paid a price for it.
Sure.
But when you look back on it, it's difficult not to think that
Hmm.
God was there with me every step of the way. And I have many flaws. I make no claims to any kind of special holiness, but um, and this is not humility. But I mean, as we see also in Scripture, um, Christ spends time with sinners and works with
Hmm.
sinners as well. All of us are sinners. And I'm just very, very grateful for the way that I've been sustained by grace throughout all of that. Eventually leading me to that moment of having a religious experience that brought me into a much deeper truth,
Hmm.
which has informed everything else from there.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Well, if let's pivot a little bit and talk about the Center for Public
Yeah,
Policy.
yeah,
So tell us a bit about the center and the master's
yeah,
degree. Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for asking. So I'm deeply grateful to Christendom College for launching this center, and of course, very humbled to have been appointed director of this center. I do think it's truly unique, and I think there's something really great about it. Among the stances that it has taken is that, of course, it's important to think through the spiritual life and the moral life and the teachings of the church in grounding how someone who wants to be in the public square, how they will pursue that career,
Right.
whether that's in public office, as a staffer, in a think tank, in a nonprofit, whatever it happens to be. But among these things specifically are statements such as, we're not going to do data science without reflecting on moral truth. We're not going to think about institutions separated from an understanding of the human person. We're not going to think about power separated from the common good. And the fact of the matter is that those are easy things to say. They're very difficult to do. And through my work as an educator over the last 25 years, I have, of course, taught students who have gone to Washington and worked in think tanks in Washington. And they had great Catholic formation, beautiful family life, and beautiful formation that continued in their university experience. And you can see where I'm going here with this. They would get to Washington and there would be just big time crises of conscience. And you would think, we went through all this. We studied the philosophy, we had the
Right.
liberal arts, we had the seminars. How did it come to this? And it's because it is just that hard. Um, And it's not to say that you can't figure it out. One of the wonderful things about the Catholic Church, particularly through Catholic social teaching, is, and I mean, I know this is obvious, but it bears saying, every generation you have thousands of people thinking about these questions, many different experiences, many different struggles. And then you just think about all the generations that have been doing this in dialogue with each other and building on each other's experiences and insights, and again, guided by the Holy Spirit, being distilled into Catholic social teaching, which is a very sophisticated and profound teaching that really tries to think through what is the proper order of things. And it's very realistic about the reality of human sin, the reality of violence, the reality of corruption. And you can look at the examples of certain saints, someone like St. Thomas More, who, and I recently wrote an article in Instaurare about this, excuse me, um, where, if you rely on Bolt's play, which I love, I think it's
Sure.
beautiful, you might get the impression that Thomas More was largely a passive resistance kind of guy. And you could see there's a real turn the other cheek ethic here.
Right.
This is a very pious and holy man. But that is only half the story with him. When he was Speaker of the House, he went to Henry and said, "We're going to have freedom of speech in the House, or else I'm not accepting the position." That was very, very bold.
Right.
It took a lot of courage. But when it came to the question of Henry making himself, I'll put it like this, claiming that he was head of
Sure.
the church in England, and the question of his marriage, uh, Thomas more indirectly opposed it.
Right.
And one of the reasons why I love him, there's many, but this is one of them, is that you see in his life and his conduct a judgment call. When should you be loud? When do you need to be bold? And when do you appreciate that you actually don't have the position to make the impact you want to make?
Right.
Um, so, thinking through all of this, there's very, very deep resources for us to do this. But I really don't think there's a lot of programs, or really any program except this one, that's going to be thinking it through. And honestly, you think about formal, symbolic, contemporary logic, its relevance to game theory. How do you connect that to the moral truths of the Catholic Church? There is a way.
Yeah.
There is a way, but it's tricky.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you've spoken to this attempt, whether, I don't know what metaphor would be best, a dance,
yeah,
weaving things together, but this attempt to bring together the principles and the Catholic social teaching into interaction with um, the practice,
right.
and without allowing the emphasis on practice to distort our approach to principles. I mean, it's possible to go to a program and spend the entire program reading Plato, which would be a
Yes.
beautiful and wonderful thing. But you're
Yes.
not prepared at that point to take up a position in Washington and read a proposed policy and find that one place that is going to be the Achilles heel of the
Yeah.
whole thing. It seems like that's what we're attempting to do here, is to create this program that brings us together.
Yeah, and something I'd add here too is that, of course, the center, as you know, because you've been spearheading this, has been developed in collaboration with think tanks in Washington, and in particular the Heritage Foundation. That's wonderful. The courses in the Masters of Public Policy will be bringing in people that have real world experience, and that's very important, not just in terms of thinking through what the practical realities
Right.
are, or where the pain points might be, but also for people who go through this program to really think through their own character and trying to understand as much as they can before they're in it what it's really like. I mean, once you are a staffer and you are in a very competitive environment and you're surrounded by other people, and you need to think, well, I could take some moral stands here, but if you do this, you might get sidelined very quickly, ignored, and drummed out. Is that the moment to take those moral stands? How do you make that judgment call? But then also understanding your own character. I mean, on the one hand, do you want to take that moral stand and get drummed out? And maybe you're the kind of person, maybe you should. Um, or there's the other temptation, which is that you don't do that and you're successful and you're praised and you become the person people go to. And to think that after doing that for a few years and you build up your reputation, that at some point you're going to take that moral stand when the
Right.
moment comes. I mean, that is very tricky, but there are people who know how to do it. And that's why it's important to bring these people in and help shape that judgment. And the only other thing I'll mention just quickly about this, and this is a bit humdrum, but I mean, if you are working on policy, for example, and let's say one day you're in a situation where someone from the governor's office writes you and they're like, look, we need you to weigh in on this topic. You got 2 hours, right? It's like there's a whole bunch of basic skills that are necessary there.
Right.
Most likely, what's going to happen is they're going to treat what you write completely dismissively. You need to be prepared for that, to be tough enough to endure that. Uh, there's going to be humiliation, there's going to be setbacks.
Right.
So there's a lot of different angles, and only people that have lived through it, I think, are in a position to really guide others to know what they're up against and to negotiate it with strength, courage, and character.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned the support we've received from Heritage, and
Mm.
Kevin has been very encouraging in our efforts and introduced a lot of really good ideas into the way we've developed this and thought this through. EPPC, Ryan Anderson has also been very helpful.
Yeah.
We've had some key conversations with him. Other people we've been dialogue partners with, American Principles, other folks who've just been very helpful. Um, I think part of the desire here is to cultivate this sense of that you've described is that this is a lot more challenging once you get on the ground.
Yeah.
Like once you're there, and in this time frame that you said 2 hours, so you've got a very short period of time. If you haven't developed those skills in advance, you're not going to know where to begin. And
Right.
if you don't have a deep root system already in the principles that are in play, um, you don't have time to read
Yeah.
to sort of get your bearings. You have to have that formation already. So it's a very unique combination. But then there's also this question about when to take the stand and when not.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it in other environments where sometimes it's not the case that someone is compromising a principle, so much as they've maybe elevated something that's not, it's a matter of prudence into the level of principle.
Yeah.
And so being able to distinguish between a pseudo principle and a real principle
Yes.
becomes a challenge as well. Um, is it possible to teach prudence, political prudence? How does one form someone for that kind of role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure after I give my humble attempt at an answer, you could also weigh
I
in
don't
on
know.
this. Yeah. But yeah, I do think so. One of the things I mentioned, St. Thomas More, he felt that the liberal arts were extremely important in forming someone's conscience. Um, and I think one thing when it comes to everyday prudence is it is possible, and I don't try to oversimplify here, but to kind of walk through and say, well, what are the order of goods? And as you just said, thinking short term versus long term, and also being very clear in your mind, what are the things I don't know?
Right.
Um, so one could take a principled stand and maybe even feel like they've won because they've got a big megaphone and people have heard it. And then they inspire a counter reaction that obliterates whatever progress they seem to have made. And this, by the way, is one of the things I think is least attended to.
Mhm.
Um, I hesitate to say too much about contemporary politics,
Sure.
but I would say this, that whenever one party or the other thinks they're owning and we're going to get sick of winning, there needs to be some attention to the fact that they are preparing the ground for
Right.
the counter reaction. Um, so I think it is possible, first of all, to study the perennial truths of the church. It's possible to look at the institutions of American government. It's possible to build up the basic skills and then to look at concrete stories from people that have been in these situations. And you can pretty much, like I said, not to oversimplify, come up with a whole decision tree through all of this. And I admit, if you drew it on a whiteboard, it looked pretty messy. But as you said, if you walk through all of those things and you practice through them and you get the stories and you think through
Right.
real quandaries, you can get to a moment that when you actually face them. Well, if I may, sorry to
Yeah.
have such a long answer, but I'll
No,
add
this is
this.
good.
Like, I know someone who I'll give two quick examples actually. I know someone who, working in politics, found herself in a position where she had to work on behalf of um, a much more limited immigration policy. or a policy that would limit immigration. And this was really a crisis for her because her parents had come to this country under a much more open immigration policy. She said, how can I do this when if this actually was successful,
Mm.
my parents could have never come here, I wouldn't be here. And we're so grateful. And my parents are such good people. And they work so hard to contribute to this country. And I'm going to build something
Right.
that would prevent them from coming here. And her response to this was very pained and very intense because she was only there because she cared. But you can take a step back and say to yourself, okay, wait, what are the church's basic teachings? How do I walk through this? How
Right.
do I understand my own emotional responses and my own loyalties? How do I understand government and the rights of government to open or restrict immigration? And think through all of this and start to work through, are you really betraying your parents here? Why are you doing what you're doing? And I think that whole decision tree,
Mm.
if you work through it, can help someone navigate this. You still might be pained at the end of it, but I think it really helps to inform what you're doing and why. And you can ask yourself too, thinking again what you brought up, short term versus long term. Is this the place where I make a stand or
Right.
decide to walk away? Or is this something where either I can reconcile myself to the policy in the end, or I can compromise because I've got greater work to do here, greater service to do? Okay,
Right.
so that's one thing. And when she came to me with this, I did sit down with her and,
Right.
of course, acknowledge her pain
Right.
and then walk through it.
Sure.
Another person I know has been for a long time and he works in politics as well, but fighting with people on message boards about abortion. And he says, after 2 years of fighting with people on message boards and abortion, no one is ever really persuaded by me. Therefore, the only solution is for the Catholic Church to take over the country, impose Catholic teaching, and burn people in the public square who don't agree with it. And I'm like, well, you came to this conclusion based on 2 years of arguing with people on message boards,
Yeah.
and I think that that's someone who would really benefit from um, the long vision of the
Yeah.
church,
Sure.
and I do think that one could teach him things
Yeah.
that I don't want to go so far as to say make him prudent, but
Right.
definitely make him more prudent than he
More
is right
prudent.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow. Wow. Yeah. That's yeah. Just maybe take a break from the internet for a while.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
that would
yeah,
be a
yeah,
place to
yeah,
start.
yeah,
Um, That'd be a place to start. Well, you mentioned Thomas More. We talked about Augustine a bit. So,
yeah.
you can say more about those if you those individuals if you would like. But, in terms of the pantheon of either political theorists or political practitioners or some combination of them, who do you look to? I mean,
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah. So, what are the sources? What are the top five? If maybe you have to draw on to.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I hope you'll forgive me because I'm just going to.
You got a list of
These
10.
will
You
be
got a
the
list of 10.
well, yeah,
so,
yeah.
so,
Well, I was going to say my top five are the ones you would expect.
yeah, sure. No, that's fine. Yeah, just
Yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
those. Yeah.
So of course, on the pagan side, Plato and Aristotle
Okay.
are very important, and yeah, on the Christian side, yeah, Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas. And beyond that, yeah, Saint Thomas More.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I emphasize Saint Thomas More is just because of his longstanding concrete political service. Right,
Right.
he's speaking from a place of real knowledge. And he has voluminous writings,
Yeah.
which thankfully, thanks to actually to Dr. Jer Wegemer primarily, but also Dr. Stephen Smith, we have some access to these, and they've
Right.
done a lot of fantastic work. But to go back to St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, I love pairing them. I don't want to be too controversial. I know there are people who will claim they agree 100% on everything. Okay, that might be true. That's an insight I haven't
Sure.
attained to yet. I find there to be a helpful contrast sometimes. And, St. Augustine, for example, really does see politics as deeply marked by sin and original sin.
Right.
And of course, people turn to him often for a view of limited government just because
Right.
he does tend to kind of say, look, it's a cesspool. But there are certain things that, as compromised as it is, as corrupt as it is, as much as we have to tolerate, there are lines you do not cross. Among them are the Ten Commandments, right? And anything that is going to interfere with Christians being able to worship. And you can still see the marks of that in Catholic social teaching. But one of the reasons why I really love St. Augustine on this is because I think if you spent a lot of time with St. Augustine, it would be difficult to come to politics naively.
Right.
Um, and he really does talk about a lot of concrete things if you go deep into his work. On the other hand, one of the things that's great about St. Thomas Aquinas, who, unlike St. Augustine, is drawing on this Platonist stream, St. Thomas Aquinas is drawing on an Aristotelian stream, and he will say, well, as the philosopher says,
Sure.
Human beings are by nature political.
Right.
Um, and there's something about that which is presented in a much more positive light. That the realm of the political, as dirty as politics can get, is also a realm in which it is possible to have civic friendship with others. It's a place in which you can express your love of other people and your love of God. And there can be joy in that.
Right.
And one thing which is very clear also when you think about the church's teaching and liturgically, like when we go to Mass every week or every day, um, there is something about the mystery of the Eucharist, which is bringing us together in the body of Christ. We are made for God and we are made for each other. And we are to love the Lord our God with all our strength, mind, spirit. And we're also to love each other as God loves us. And that makes it very clear how important the communal aspect is. So each of us is an individual,
Right.
but each of us is in some way or another made for others. And there is something about the political, which in this world can be a reflection of that. So, and that helps to explain also why the question of virtue is so important.
Right.
Why you actually can look to the church and its spiritual teachings, why you can look to its understanding of virtue, and think that those do have a place in the realm of politics, even if sometimes you have to make compromises, sometimes you need to delay, sometimes you need to think about the long term versus the short term, and that can be painful and hard. Uh, but nevertheless, those teachings also suggest, I'm repeating it here, but that there can be something very positive and joyful in that work. So I think that between St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, you get principles that are very, very rich.
Yeah.
And then when you combine that with St. Thomas More,
Right.
I mean, man, this was a guy who's in the thick of it. And at the moment of his execution, you probably know this, right? He made some joke to the executioner, like, don't cut the beard didn't offend anybody, and
Yeah.
and I mean, you could say like, well, that's a silly joke, but I mean, imagine the tension of that moment.
Yeah.
Imagine people who come to the moment of their death and they're shaking and they can't control their bodily functions. It's so terrifying.
Yeah.
And St. Thomas More makes a joke, and you could say, well, that's frivolous, but at the same time, he also forgave his executioner. So he combined
Right.
that lightheartedness with what is profound. He understood the corruption of human beings, but he also understood that the glory can shine through as well. It's very hard, but between St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, and someone like St. Thomas More, I think you've got an amazing triumvirate for starting to think through.
Yeah.
And then think about this program, bringing in real world people who have actually been there. I think it's an amazing, amazing opportunity.
Yeah. And even approaching some of these questions as kinds of case studies, and in a
Yeah.
way, so all along the way throughout, you don't just do, a few courses in theory and then courses in practice, that it's integrated
Yeah.
and along the way. When one thinks of ancient philosophy, if you've had even a passing acquaintance with sort of ancient political philosophy, two phrases tend to stick in the memory. One is the noble lie,
Yeah.
and one is the city and speech.
Right.
In the noble lie, the idea that there's somehow something profoundly already corrupted or corrupting at the very basis of political activity, which you've spoken to. And I think the idea that Thomas Aquinas could, in fact, be an antidote to some of that.
Yeah.
But maybe you could say more about that. And then the idea that the city and speech, the idea that this temptation toward a kind of idealizing,
Right.
and we're going to sacrifice everything in order to achieve the perfect good.
Right.
Could you maybe those two things, people who've passed, have a passing acquaintance with those two phrases, could you say a bit about those and how this program might prepare people to navigate the dangers associated with both of those ideas?
Yeah. By the way, let me compliment you on that question because that
Anyway,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
let's
That is an excellent question, and I'm just very grateful to God that I've thought about it a little bit already. But I'd say this with respect to Plato, the noble lie in the city and speech. So sometimes the noble lie is taken to mean that in the realm of politics, you just need to lie to people about things and make things seem nobler than they really are in order to make it bearable. And you can see why there's a certain kind of interpreter that sees a precursor to Friedrich Nietzsche in this,
Right.
because he does literally say that in Birth of Tragedy and other works that we need to make things beautiful because the truth of them is unbearable. And I think that that is not what's going on with the noble lie. I think that for someone like Plato and the Platonic Socrates, the noble or the beautiful is real. And it transcends us, and it is also manifest in everyday life. But it is true because of the hurly-burly of politics. And if you look at Republic Book 8, he gets into it. And also Book 9 with his account of tyranny. And Plato himself, um, as you know well, uh, had a very political family. And after the Athenian democracy and the Peloponnesian War became so naked in its pursuit of power and so naked in its willingness to crush people and enslave people and heap misery upon them for its own profit, he was so hopeful for the regime that followed to purge those terrible elements, and then to see members of his own family
Mm.
descend into the same murderousness. This is someone who has, if there's any idealism left in him, he's earned it
Right.
through real world experience. And I think that what he means by something like the noble lie as presented by Socrates is that it is so the noble lie there actually doesn't refer to nobility in the sense of some kind of beautiful moral order that transcends us. It actually, the Greek word is genion. It refers
Mm.
to birth.
Okay.
And it's really about the fact that in our birth, how do we understand that we are also in some way fundamentally a community?
Mm.
Um, Even though in our birth there are also differences between
Right.
us.
Right.
And this is going to sound strange, but in a way, it's a little bit like something that you find in John Locke, where he says, look, we're all equal, except in the million ways we aren't.
Right.
You're like, okay, what does that
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
And
Mm.
the Platonic Socrates is struggling with this. Um, you see this in Republic Book 4, where Adeimantus says to Socrates, you have this class of guardians in the city, and they have this military training, and they don't have private property, they don't have private families. It's the lower classes, lower, that have this. And he says, what would your apology be to these guardians? And it's interesting when he says, those to whom the city properly belongs,
Mm.
but who enjoy none of the good things in it.
Mm.
What does that really mean? That means the person who fights, the person who is of a certain rank, they're the ones who really own the city.
Mm.
And the ones who labor, it doesn't really belong to them.
Mm.
And therefore, the fighters, by right, get to take things.
Mm.
That's what Adeimantus is really suggesting.
Mm.
And Socrates comes up with this noble lie to kind of say, well, we're all brothers in a way. And there's a way in which the God fashioned us, each of us, to have an order in things, and we should all respect each other and look out for each other. And he's quite clear, I'm trying to do this because these guardians, I want them to be noble dogs. I don't want them to be
Right.
wolves. And I think that the Christian teaching responds to this, right? Each of us is made in the image of God. Each of us is a moral agent.
Right.
And each of us, and this is something that emerges in St. Thomas More's understanding and also in Catholic social doctrine, because each of us is a moral agent and has a certain kind of freedom, in any arrangement that we enter into, you may, almost certainly are, smarter than me. You're taller than me. You may very well be stronger than me, um, more rhetorically polished. And yet, in anything that we enter into, it is within my power to say no.
Mm.
And this
Mm.
power is so fundamental to human nature that even the smallest children, unfortunately for us parents, have
Right.
this power.
Right.
I remember I was once giving my nephew a bath. And I said, look, bath time is over. You got to go to bed. And he said, he's barely 2 years old. And he said, I'm not leaving this bath until I see my mother. And I'm like, is that a deal? He's like, yep. I was like, bad deal. I called him his mother. I said, here's your mother. Bath time is over. And he said, that's not my mother. I was like, no, that is your mother. And you saw this little glimmer in his eye, and he said, no.
Oh, wow.
And that's the point. At the age of 2, he already knew he could withhold his consent to something as basic as agreeing whether
Acknowledge.
that was his mother or not.
Wow.
So I say this just to say that the Christian teaching that emphasizes this freedom and this moral agency is not a lie.
Right.
It's a truth that we encounter. And I would argue that you see that in Plato in the form of the dialogue. But what I just described is an insight that I don't think is fully in Plato or explored in Plato. But it is something that is very deeply explored by St. Augustine. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not wrong, nothing wrong with Plato that he didn't have everything.
Sure.
So I think that what you have is that, yeah, you go from noble lie to noble truth. And once you see that truth, you realize it actually really is a truth.
Wow.
I could say something about, I was talking at length about this. I
No,
could
no,
say
yeah.
something about
Say
this.
something about the city and speech. So,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. So, and I think this is very important for the program we're developing as well, because you put this beautifully. There is a danger in reading, say, Aristotle. Let's shift to Aristotle for a minute. And you're reading the Nicomachean Ethics, and you're getting his account of virtue and the magnanimous person. And the magnanimous person has all the virtues. And to have prudence, you have to have all the virtues. Controversial part
Yeah.
of Aristotle. And you know the right thing to do. You choose it for its own sake or for the sake of the noble, and you're habituated to it. And I think a reasonable person at some point might ask, okay, who is actually like this?
Right.
And I know a few people who kind of claim that they're like this, but well,
They've
anyway.
never been on this show.
Yeah. And you ask their friends
And
if
they don't
they're
host. They
actually,
don't host this show. So,
yeah. But ask their friends if they're actually like that. There might be a difference of opinion, but you might say, look, if you understand virtue like this, and I do know people who understand virtue like this, I mean, it is a fair criticism that it just leads to like extreme naivety and even to a kind of just lack of prudence because you're looking for it where it just isn't.
right.
But there's this interesting thing, right? If you read Aristotle's Rhetoric,
Right.
he says magnanimity is a virtue of the young because the young still think they're worthy of great things because life hasn't crushed it out of them yet. And you're like, wait, wait, how does this compare to the other account of
Right.
magnanimity?
Right.
And people wrestle with it and they say, well, this was an earlier work of Aristotle's before he figured out the other one. And you're like, is it though? You know, what it could really be is that, and I think Aristotle might understand this very soundly, is that it could very well be that that account of virtue is 100% true. And it could be that none of us ever lives up to it more than 20 or 30% by the grace of God. And you could say, well, 20 or not even 50, not even 80, let's just abandon it. And it's like, well, look, the difference between living up to it 20% or 30 matters.
Right.
The difference between living up to it 5 or 0 matters. If you think there are no standards,
Right.
and this is something which is also clear in Catholic social doctrine, then things become untethered. There's a world of difference between wrestling with the question of whether to compromise or not, thinking through whether you are too in love with power or not, or thinking that there is no other pole in
Right.
relationship
Right.
to that. And when I think about the city and speech, I think of it that way. I mean, on the one hand, I am somewhat persuaded by Leo Strauss's claim that the city in speech is not entirely intended to be implemented and it's intended to show the limits of politics. But as Aristotle points out, the laws also kind of comes around to a somewhat similar
Yeah.
regime, just
Sure.
compromised. And I think that the city in speech is not an ideal because the guardians not having private property or private families is with a view to the way human beings become corrupted by their love of wealth and their desire to advance their family at the expense of the common good.
Right.
Um, So it's not idealized in that sense. But he is pretty clear that he doesn't think it can be implemented.
Right.
And there are principles that are revealed in there that it's important for it, so to speak, as a heuristic device to help you to see those higher principles, to understand how deeply they can be compromised, but to understand that that compromise isn't an invitation to nakedly pursue power. That compromise is to understand the intensity of the fight for the common good, the intensity of the fight to live a moral life.
Wow. Wow. That's an excellent way to conclude our conversation.
Thank
So,
you. Yeah,
I mean,
thank you.
I think you've summed up. That's another way of saying to restore all things in Christ. I mean, and
Yeah,
that fight is a real thing, and for the common good and the virtuous life. I mean, those are This is why we've created the center and the masters in public policy, and we're trying to integrate these things. So thank you. I learned a great deal from this conversation. You were very
yeah.
generous with your time, and thank you for your insights. So,
No, thank you. It's a
all right.
great pleasure to be here.
God bless. Thank you for listening to Christendom Conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about Christendom College and its mission, visit us at christendom.edu. Until next time, may we all continue to seek the truth, live the faith, and restore all things in Christ. God bless.